So Shavuot, where I'm sitting here in Jerusalem a few hours before Shavuot is, well, Shabbos before Shavuot is going to descend upon us. And you know what? Maybe I will just not look at the screen and I'm just going to talk. And we'll see what happens. So this amazing day, right? We're both remembering, reenacting, reliving this amazing experience at Har Sinai when the heavens came down to meet us. We went up to the heavens to meet the heavens, and there was a total, according to Jewish tradition, there was a total shift in reality from that moment on. So I want to explore that. I also want to explore, to give a little, maybe a little insight and some new ideas into the tradition of eating dairy on Shavuot and where that comes from biblically. I also want to acknowledge and maybe cultivate a little closing to. There's a lot of people. I don't know who's going to watch this. Maybe nobody, but a lot of people that have seen or been part of the reading my book. So to kind of acknowledge that. But let's start with dairy. So I grew up, a little bit about me, I grew up yeshivish in Passaic, New Jersey. Some call it Haredi, some call it yeshivish. And I was very into it as a child, and then in high school, as a teenager, I was very quickly disenchanted. And one of the things that I was most disenchanted with is the concept of Naseh v'Nishma, which means that at Har Sinai, the Jewish people said, we will do and we will listen. And the difficult thing for me in that was that it was used as to support a belief in blind following and following dogma without understanding. And that, of course, irked me immensely as a teenager. Now, when I'm a little older, a little more mature, I do find more meaning in that, especially the other night with at the wedding, right? Kind of like, you don't, when you go into a marriage, you have no idea what it's actually going to be like. You have no real understanding, but you still stand under the chuppah and you say, Naseh, I'm going to do it. I'm going to stand here, I'm committing. And then, Nishma, and then as life goes on and life continues to unfold, I will understand deeper into what exactly is going on. So there is a lot of depth into that, but I think there's perhaps even more depth, which we'll get to soon. So let's take the dairy first. Where does this dairy come from? So we find in the Torah a very interesting thing. When we are told about Shavuot, actually not well, let's read what the Torah says. In Shemot 34, it says, "You shall observe a feast of weeks," right, the holiday of Shavuot, of the first fruits of the wheat harvest, and the harvest of the ingathering at the turn of the year, right? So it's going through the three holidays. 3 times a year, all of your males should appear before Hashem. I will drive out the nations from your path and enlarge your territories. No one will covet your land. And you will appear before Hashem 3 times. You go to Jerusalem, you go to the temple, and you'll appear there 3 times. You shall not offer blood of my sacrifice with anything leavened, right? So leaven offerings were not allowed to be brought into the Mizbeach, except for 1 time a year, which was Shavuot. And the choice, then it says, the choice fruits of your soil you shall bring to the house of God. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. So the choice fruits is talking about Shavuot, right? On Shavuot, one of the mitzvot that we have is to bring bikurim. And in the same pasuk, it says you shall bring the first fruits and don't boil a kid in its mother's milk, which seems very out of place, right? What does boiling a kid in its mother's milk have to do with the first fruits of a tree. Why? It's not only in the same paragraph, it's the same pasuk, it's the same sentence. It says, you should bring the first fruits of your soil to the house of Hashem, to the Beit HaMikdash. And by the way, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. If people were actually sitting in front of me, I'd go around and ask some, what are people thinking about this? But no one is sitting in front of me. So let's explore. So to rewind, each of the three Shalosh Regalim are part of a process of rectifying our relationship to certain resources. The Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah tells us this straight out. It's the second Mishnah in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, and it says in 4 seasons there's judgment, divine judgment is passed in the world. On Pesach, in respect to grain. On Shavuot, in respect to fruit. On Rosh Hashanah, all creatures pass before God like children. And on Sukkot, in respect to the rain. So we have grain, we have fruit, we have human beings, and we have rain. So part of this is that each of these holidays, what does it mean that there's judgment passed on this? That we have certain things to do, certain rectifications that need to happen. My family is calling me right now. I will call them back. We have certain rectifications to do and connected to each of these 3 things, and we can't go into each of them in depth. But Sukkot, which is the beginning of the rainy season, right? So we have a chance to rectify our relationship to water and the resources of water. On Pesach, which is beginning of the wheat growing, so we have our opportunity to rectify our relationship to grain. And on Shavuot, which is actually the beginning of most of the season for most of the Sheva Minim, most of the 7 indigenous species of the land of Israel, that begins at Shavuot and continues through the summer until Sukkot. And so we have a chance to rectify our relationship to the first fruits. So much so that you actually, so most people, I think that most people actually did not bring Bikurim on Shavuot. The reason why we know that is the Mishnah says that people can bring and even say the proclamation that one is supposed to say when they bring Bikurim until Sukkot. So the Mishnah says, but actually on a actual reality level, most of the first fruits that grow on the tree, most of the Sheva Minim, are ripening after Shavuos. So, and of course we know that they didn't have refrigerators. So, and the Bikurim were supposed to be fresh. They're not bringing dried fruits. They're not going to bring, crumpled dried fruits to the Beit HaMikdash as an offering of thanks to the fresh crop. So I don't have it in front of me, but grapes, olives, figs, dates, everything grows over the summer months, and so we have an opportunity at the beginning of that time on Shavuot to rectify our relationship with them. Another important aspect of this, and we're still thinking about this tradition of eating dairy on Shavuot, right? So when part of the Bikurim that the Torah says, let me find it. The Torah says, you shall consume the firstlings of your herds and flocks in the presence of Hashem, in the place where He will choose to establish His name, so that you may learn to revere Hashem forever. And you shall feast there in the presence of Hashem and rejoice in your household. That's what it says in Devorah. And so we see that one of the aspects of Shavuot is bringing the karbanot of the fruit, but also the karbanot, the bikurim of the animals. Why is it that the bikurim of the animals are brought on Shavuot? Well, because that's when they're born, right? They're born in the beginning of spring, around Pesach time, and the sages already tell us that you can't bring the bikurim unless they're 30 days old, and so the bikurim of the animals are brought on Shavuot, because that's just when they're born, and you have the bikurim, the firstborns of these flocks, and you bring them as an offering to the Beit HaMikdash, and you eat them there with your whole family. It's a celebration, and you have 40 loaves of bread and everything. And in that context, the Torah also tells us, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. So the Rambam explains a little bit what's going on here. The Rambam on Shemot 34, where it says, don't cook a kid in its mother's milk, he says, this law is mentioned here alongside the commandment to bring the first fruits of your soil to the house of Hashem, because when they brought the first fruits of the earth, they also brought the firstborn kids and lambs. And that time period, because that time period is when the kids were born and raised, and therefore there was milk in the udders of the mothers. All right, so before industrial farming, there was only one time a year that animals were born. Now we've developed ways based on manipulating light and heat and things like that for industrialized animals to have more than one gestation period. But before we figured out how to do that, and that's a question, right, also of the ethical components of that. But before that could happen, there was only one time a year when that happened, and that was shortly before Shavuot, as the Rambam tells us. So the animals, you would, right? So because the kids were born that time of year, there was milk in the udders of the mothers. And the Rambam continues, many times they would bring the mothers with the kid, so that the kid can continue to nurse, so that it should not die, right? Let's say you're living in the north of Israel, and you're traveling for about a month to get to Jerusalem to offer this offering. So, of course, you need to bring the mothers along, because the kid needs to eat, the kid needs to drink the milk. And so the Torah tells us, when you're bringing this offering on Shavuot, don't cook this korban in its mother's milk, right? Don't cook this korban in its mother's milk. The Rambam continues, and as they came to celebrate and enjoy the festival by eating the firstborn kids with all of its delicacies with the Kohanim, the Torah warns them about this forbidden act of cooking a kid in his mother's milk. So let's rewind a bit, right? There's many interpretations and understandings throughout the ages of sages that have given of this mitzvah, right? So the Rashbam tells us, and the Ramban tells us, that this mitzvah is about cruelty, right? It's just pure cruelty to cook a baby in the very milk that it was intended to nourish it, right? And so how could you possibly do that? It's just totally cruel. Rabbeinu Bachya tells us that actually the reason is because it's related to health reasons. I don't know exactly why, but for some reason he felt that milk and meat together perhaps is not healthy for the body. The Rambam says that this was actually an ancient pagan ritual. This is very common for the Rambam to talk about this. Right? It's an ancient pagan ritual of cooking and consuming meat and milk together. It was a pagan ritual to do that. And so the Torah tells us don't do that, because the Torah, of course, always wants us to distance us from the practices of the heathens. Right? And I like the word heathen because the connotations of heathen is much more gruesome than an idol worshiper, right? in the minds of the Torah, in the minds of the sages, a heathen was someone that had no ethical morals or standing. And so, of course, the Torah all the time, over and over again, wants to distance us from that. And then, of course, the most common, maybe more recent understanding of this mitzvah is that you don't want to, you can't cook milk and meat together, you can't eat milk and meat together, because one is rachamim, right? The milk is chesed, it's compassion, it's life, and the other one is gevur, right? Meat is death, and we don't want to mix meat and death and life together, which is very, very beautiful, very sweet. But it also, for me at least, it's a nice conceptual kind of putting meaning onto this mitzvah, but it doesn't explain really to me. It doesn't do it for me, right? Okay, it's nice, but there's lots of things that we could do that perhaps are more powerfully expressive of the fact of not mixing death and life, not mixing compassion and judgment, gevura and chesed, all these things. So what's going on here? As I was saying at the beginning of this thing, that each of the shalosh regalim, each of these three pilgrimages, part of it was to go through a process of rectification about our resources. The resources that we're rectifying in this situation are on Shavuot are twofold. One, it's the beginning of the heat of the summer, right? And so all of a sudden, I'm sitting right now, right near me over there. You can go for a walk in Emek Hamasleva, and everything is brown, everything's dry already, and it looks like the heat is starting to pick up. Without irrigation, there's no way to actually grow anything anymore, and so and the world starts to look like it's dying, right? As opposed to other places in the world where the summer is the time full of life. Actually, in Israel, winter is a little bit more alive, and summer is very dry and very brown and very dead. And so, at the beginning of this time period, one might be very tempted to hoard, or to deceit, or to steal, or to cheat, because, especially if you're a poor person, because you don't have so much food, and you're going into this time where there's very little water, where there's no grain in the fields anymore. Everything's been harvested around Pesach time. Around now, right? And the only things that are still alive are the fruits on the trees, right? And we have to remember that it's not just that the Sheva Minim are not just the niceties of the land. We have to remember that actually diets were very, very simple, and these 7 species were the diet. This was the food. This is what they were eating, right? So they had grain, they had wine, they had grapes, they had figs, and they had olives, and they had dates, and the other ones which I'm forgetting right now. This was what they it says about Yehudah Nasi, who was one of the richest people in his time period, and compared to the Roman emperor. And the Gemara says about him, what does it mean that he was rich? It means that he had lettuce and cucumbers on his table all year long. That's what it meant that he was rich. Lettuce and cucumbers. So in my refrigerator over here, I have some lettuce and I have some cucumbers. So I guess I'm very wealthy. I also have this fancy computer, so I guess I'm quite wealthy. But I digress. So so at the beginning of this summer season, one might be very tempted to do all that, what I was just saying, to hoard, to deceit, to steal, to pillage, to whatever the words are. And so the Torah tells us, right, we bring our bikurim of these fruits and of these animals as a way of rectifying our relationship with those resources. One of the biggest ways, and one of the biggest resources is protein. And the two main ways of getting protein in the ancient world is milk and meat. So the Torah tells us, when you are about to enter into this time of scarcity. And when you're be very, very careful. Don't mix two protein sources together. It's not necessary. It's gluttonous. It's a waste of resources. It's not what we want. It's not what Hashem wants. It's not what the Torah wants. And the Torah says it very explicitly in the context twice. In the context of Shavuot, don't do it. The third time that it's mentioned to not cook milk and meat together is in Devorah, when Moshe is repeating the laws of the Torah, and he places this law within the context of the main dietary laws of kashrut. But the other two places where it's found is in the context of Shavuot. So, what does this mean? I'm not telling anyone to do anything, but we definitely should be more aware. Shavuot is calling on us to become more aware of our resources, and specifically of the first fruits and of the animal-based protein sources that we have. So that might mean for you not eating dairy on Shavuot. That might mean only eating dairy on Shavuot because maybe perhaps it's a little bit more sustainable than eating a bunch of meat. Might mean not eating meat at all because we don't have a Beit HaMikdash. I'll leave that up to you to explore. That's the first thing I want to talk about. The second thing I wanted to talk about in connection to this also, right? We're talking about preparing for going into the dry season. And okay, we're gonna shift gears 360. What actually happened on Har Sinai? What happened on Har Sinai? So there's a lot of different things, but let me read you some Chazal, and this is actually the last teaching in my book here, Dance of the Omer. It's a step-by-step guide to self-transformation through Sfirat HaOmer. And these are the boxes of more books. But the Torah tells us something very, very interesting. The Torah tells us that today, on the 5th of Nisan, well, actually, I guess tomorrow, because Shabbos is tomorrow, that's the 5th of Nisan. The Torah tells us that early in the morning, this is in Shema 24, early in the morning, Moshe set up a Mizbeach at the foot of the mountain with 12 stone pillars for the 12 tribes. He designated some young men who were the firstborns of their families. That's what the sages explained to us. And they offered bulls, as elevation offerings and well-being offerings to Hashem. Moshe took the Sefer HaBrit, the Book of the Covenant, and read it to them aloud. And they said, all that Hashem has told us, Na'aseh v'nishma. So this is where Na'aseh v'nishma happens, actually. They say Na'aseh v'nishma the day before Har Sinai, the day before Shavuot, the day before Matan Torah. So that already should deepen the question, what is this Na'aseh v'nishma? Then Moshe took the blood from these korbanot and sprinkled them on the people, and said, this is the blood of the covenant that Hashem makes with you. And then all of the Moshe and Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, and the 70 elders went up onto the mountain, and they saw Hashem, and underneath the feet of Hashem there was the likeness of a platform of sapphire, like the pure sky. So what is this Sefer HaBrit, right? Moshe took the Book of the Covenant, the Sefer HaBrit, and read it in front of the people, and that's what they said Na'aseh v'nishma about. So the Midrash, the Mechilta of Rabbi Yishmael, the Midrash explains that this Sefer HaBrit contained two things. One, it contained the entire story from creation until that point. So all the stories in Bereshit, all the stories of Shemot, how the world was created, stories of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, stories of Yosef, the stories of the 12 tribes of Mitzrayim, everything that happened until that point, as well as the commandments that were given at Marah. Marah is a bitter water oasis that they found on their way to the Sinai of the desert of Sinai, and there because of having found this water and everything, God comes down and gives them commandments. And the Gemara explains, and this is called the commandments given at Mara. And the Gemara explains, what were these commandments? They included the 7 mitzvot of Noach that they were commanded to keep, as well as an additional 3. The administration of justice, Shabbat, and honoring one's father and mother. Okay? 7 plus 3, that's 10. So they had the 7 mitzvot of Bnei Noach, and an additional administration of justice, Shabbat, and honoring one's father and mother. So let's go into that, and maybe the more learned amongst us, these are raising questions already, and maybe someone's seeing some comparisons between this list and the 10 Commandments that were supposed to be given in three months' time, right? Mara happened about 3 months before, not 3 months, but a while before Har Sinai, on the way to Har Sinai. And so let's go through each of these mitzvot. So what is in the Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach? There's actually a machloket, even how many there are. Ula says in a place in the Gemara that there's actually 30. There's other people that say there's 70 mitzvot, and it's talking about categories of mitzvot, right? But the most widely accepted idea of these mitzvot is that there's 7, and they include: do not worship other gods or idols. Do not curse or blaspheme the name of God. Do not murder. Do not commit sexual immorality, adultery, incest, bestiality, all those things. Do not steal. Do not eat a limb off of a living animal. And 7, do not establish courts and legal systems. So just to say a small thing about eating a limb off of a living animal, right? I remember when I first learned this, I was pretty shocked, and over the years I've met many people who are pretty shocked by this mitzvah, and because it's quite shocking. Why would someone rip off a limb off of a living animal and eat it? That's like total barbarics, totally. But of course, the Torah doesn't warn us against complete things that aren't tempting, things that don't make any sense, things that people wouldn't actually do. So what's going on here? So in a time without refrigerators or freezers, right, it's actually quite a good idea to perform a little surgery, right? You have one animal, you're a poor person, you have a sheep, and maybe you have a tremendous occasion that's happening, but you're also a small family. And you know that you're not going to finish a whole animal. And we know that families themselves couldn't finish a whole animal, actually, because on Pesach, right, one of the laws is to eat together in chaburot, in groups, so as not to leave anything over, so that there's actually no waste of the korban. And so families had to come together to be able to finish this one animal in one night, so that it doesn't rot, right? So if you're your own little family, chances are you can't finish an animal, and so a really great idea actually is to perform a very quick and easy and sterile surgery, cut off a limb, maybe the front leg of an animal, that it can still survive, sew it back up, right? Heal it, all these things. And then you have a little bit of meat to eat, and the rest of the animal can live until the next occasion. But obviously we know that that's really cruel, and it's not fair to an animal, and to make an animal limp and all these things, it's no good. So the Torah tells us you can't do that. Okay, so I digress though. So let's go back. So these are 7, and then the laws of Mara, right? They were given an additional 3, which are the administration of justice, Shabbat, and honoring one's father and mother. So we see already that actually there's a little bit of an overlap already, right? They in Sheva mitzvot, they're obligated to set up courts and legal systems, and also in the laws of Mara, they're supposed to establish courts of justice. So they're just being told to do the same thing twice? That doesn't make that doesn't really make sense. Let's deepen this a little bit more. When we compare these 10 commandments that were given at Mara and the 10 commandments that were given at Har Sinai, we actually find that every single commandment of the 10 commandments was given already 3 months before at Mara, except for one. I'll give you a moment to think about maybe what that one was. Okay, the only one that wasn't given before. So let's go one by one. Okay, establishing laws and legal systems. The first of the 10 commandments is Ani Hashem, I am Hashem your God. Now that phrase is used throughout the Torah, kind of as a closing line, whenever there's a section of laws, of legal, of ethical weight, and it's kind of used as a kind of like a stamp saying, pay attention, pay really close attention to this, because this is really important, because this is how to become an ethical person. Why? Because I am Hashem. And sometimes when it's even more important, it says, I am Hashem your God who took you out from the land of Mitzrayim. Okay, so everywhere in the Torah, this line means basically to be ethical, to have a legal system. They're very often connected to laws, ben adam lechavero, where it's very infrequent that line, that I am Hashem your God, is used for rituals or holidays, or it's usually used for things of laws between people to make a just society. So we have at Mara the establishment of laws and courts and legal systems so as to make a legal society. And we have at Har Sinai, Ani Hashem Elokecha, I am your God. Okay, 2. In Mara, right, from the 7 Noachide laws, we have do not worship other gods. In the 10 commandments, we also have do not worship other gods or idols. 3. We have do not blaspheme or curse God's name. That's at Mara. On Har Sinai, we have you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain or swear falsely by God's name. Okay, but the same thing, basically the same thing. 4. At Mara, about Shabbat. At Har Sinai, again, about Shabbat. 5. Honoring your fathers and mothers. Again, at Mara and at Har Sinai, honoring your fathers and mother. At Mara, do not murder. At Har Sinai, do not murder. At Mara, do not commit adultery. At Har Sinai, do not commit adultery. At Mara, do not steal. At Har Sinai, do not steal. Then we have the administration of justice, which was one of the 3 additional laws in Mara. And then we have that you shall not bear false witness, meaning it's basically an amped up, a higher, more specific and evolved expression of the previous law given at Mara, to basically not bear witness, not bear false witness. Why? Because you're gonna ruin if you have false witnesses. It makes a joke out of the whole legal enterprise. There's like what's the point of having set all this up if people are just coming in and lying? It's a joke. Okay, then the last one at Mara was do not eat any part of a living animal. And that's specific to Mara. And then at Har Sinai, do not covet, do not be jealous of your neighbor. So the Torah is going to go very at length, right, to develop the laws of do not eat from a living animal, when it goes through all the dietary laws of kashrut, right? It's going to go much more in depth. It's going to take that one law and expand it into many, 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 many laws. So the only one really that doesn't have any other previous expression or subsequent expression is that you shall not covet. So what's going on? So I want to posit that what we're doing at Har Sinai, what's happening at Har Sinai, what happened then and what's happening now, is not the revelation of new laws, because actually, as we're seeing, there was no new laws except for this one. There will be many, many, many laws in the future, right? And there's a machloket of in the Gemara when the rest of the Torah is written. We know now that the beginning of the Torah was written before and was read out loud to the people the day before Har Sinai. And the Gemara tells us that actually one of the opinions is that Moshe continued to write as they're traveling through the desert. Whenever there was a new revelation, that it was written, and he wrote it until the last few psukim, the last few verses that talked about his death, and Yeshua finished that, and that's how the Torah was written. So there aren't new laws necessarily given on Har Sinai. So if there are no new laws, then what is going on? What was the point of this whole thing? Why is this such an amazing moment? So the Rambam discusses this, and he says that actually we don't do the commandments that were given in the Torah, that were previously given in the Torah, because they were given before Har Sinai, but we do them because they were re-given on Har Sinai. But we still have to understand, what does that mean? So I want to give a parable. It's let's take a king of flesh and blood, and he decides that he wants to make a new law in his realm. He decides to make a new law, and so what does he do? He gathers all of his most trusted advisors, his ministers, his advisors, the representatives that are throughout the land. He calls them together and he says, "Hey, read over these laws. Tell me what you think." And so they read over the laws, and they say, we agree with this law. This is a good law. Now, Seven Ishma, this is a good law. Yeah, let's put it let's do it. Let's do it, and then we'll understand even how to apply it properly throughout the realm. Because of course, when a law is any policy that's written, it needs to be tweaked every so often. So this is what goes on before Har Sinai. Hashem gathers the representatives, his representatives of the divine, and gathers them together and says, "Hey, these are the laws I want to bring out into the world. This is the reality I want to create in the world. What do you think?" They say, "Nasev Nishma." They say, "Okay, yeah, this is great. Let's do it." And then the next day, that proclamation goes out to the rest of the universe, as we're told over and over again in Midrashim, in different Hasidic sources, right? That the voice that went out from Har Sinai went out across the entire world, and permeated into the depths of these people's beings, and they're awakened to a divine revelation throughout the entire world. Which means that Shavuot, and I don't know if any of this was actually any clear. I'm sorry if it wasn't. I don't think anyone was watching anyways. What it means that Shavuot is not actually about a set of laws. It's about discovering a deeper identity about yourself, discovering a revelation about yourself. It's about becoming a representative of the divine, becoming a minister of the realm. And that's what it's all about. So l'chaim to us doing that. L'chaim to us receiving and downloading the revelation, a vision, right? Whatever revelation means, but a vision, a clear vision of our purpose in the world, of our place in the world, of what we have to offer the world, of and being able to bring that into the world, being able to bring that in a very deep, palpable way, so that we can inspire ourselves, we can inspire our loved ones, we can inspire our acquaintances, we can inspire the strangers we meet, and we can inspire people that we've never met and we might never meet in our lives. So everyone should have a great and amazing Shavuot, and Chaim.